a glass jar filled with heavily polluted urban sewer water turned out to be home to creatures I never even knew existed. Hidden beneath the murky water was an entire world of tiny organisms, living together as a thriving miniature society. But how could these creatures survive and flourish in an environment with almost no oxygen? And where did they find enough food to sustain themselves? To uncover the answers, let's go back to the very first days of this jar, where every mystery slowly began to reveal itself. To find out what was living inside this storm drain, I filled a small glass jar with some of the mud and sediment from the bottom. I also added some of the dirty water to help maintain the habitat and keep any organisms inside alive. For now, I couldn't see anything because the water was still far too cloudy. So I sealed the jar and placed it in a spot with enough light for photosynthesis. A few days later, the water had become much clearer, but I still couldn't see everything inside. When I zoomed in for a closer look, I noticed countless tiny organisms, and they all seemed to be incredibly active. Then the first visitor suddenly darted across the screen at remarkable speed. Near the surface, I spotted many more creatures just like it gathering together in a large swarm. It almost looked as if they were holding some kind of underwater festival. The first inhabitants I identified in my jar were tiny crustaceans from the Cyclopidae family. Cyclopidae are a family of microscopic crustaceans belonging to the subclass Copepoda. They are widely distributed in ponds, lakes, rivers, ditches, and even temporary pools of water. Most species measure only 0.5 to 2 millimeters in length. They have transparent bodies, a single red eye in the center of the head, and swim with their characteristic short, jerky movements powered by their strong antennae. They are a vital part of the aquatic food web, filtering the water and feeding primarily on algae and other microscopic organisms suspended in it. Looking down toward the bottom, I could see countless tiny objects attached to the algae. From what I know, these are most likely the eggs of small invertebrates, such as freshwater snails, tiny crustaceans, or aquatic insects. We'll probably have to wait a few more days before we can find out exactly what they are. I also spotted another fascinating creature. It had curled its body up as if it were settling in for a long sleep. After taking a closer look, I realized it was a mosquito larva, currently in the second stage of its life cycle. Over here, I found another individual clinging to the glass. Its mouth parts were constantly moving, most likely filtering food to satisfy its growing appetite. From this angle, you can clearly see the tiny bristles covering its body, along with its 2 eyes and well-developed mouth parts. Its diet mainly consists of algae, bacteria, and other microscopic organisms suspended in the water. This is known as a mosquito larva, or wriggler, the second stage in a mosquito's life cycle. A first instar larva measures only about 1.5 millimeters in length, while a fourth instar larva can grow to 8 to 10 millimeters before transforming into a pupa. A miniature world is gradually taking shape inside this glass jar, filled with countless tiny creatures, many of which I have yet to discover. After spending quite a while observing the jar, the creature that impressed me the most was this orange one. At first, I thought it was just a dead leaf caught on the bottom. But when I looked more closely, I noticed it resembled a cockroach and had a pair of remarkably muscular front legs. This is a giant water bug from the Belostomatidae family, the largest family of insects in the order Hemiptera. They are fierce aquatic predators using their powerful, hook-like front legs to seize and firmly hold onto their prey. Did you catch what just happened? A tiny air bubble was released from the tip of its abdomen. I watched it for quite a while, and every few minutes it would do the same thing again. This is part of its breathing process. It breathes air and periodically releases a bubble containing carbon dioxide before taking in fresh air to maintain its oxygen supply. But as soon as it seemed to notice I was filming, it retreated deeper into the bottom of the jar to hide. Maybe I'll see it again another day, once it no longer sees me as a threat. There's another tiny creature with a long thread-like body, constantly wriggling through the water. It seems to be searching for food around the jar. It could be some kind of aquatic worm, but I still can't identify exactly what species it is. Another tiny visitor was crawling just beneath the water's surface. Its small, bright red body immediately caught my attention. It moved with surprising force, and then it struck the tiny crustacean with a sudden, powerful attack. I soon realized this little red worm was extremely territorial about its feeding spot. Whenever a copepod swam too close to the patch of organic debris it was feeding on, it would violently whip its body to drive the intruder away. Although it wasn't trying to hunt or eat the copepod, it was clearly determined to defend its feeding territory within the limited space of this tiny enclosed ecosystem. This time, the victim was a tiny white worm crawling through the red worm's feeding territory. The moment the unwelcome visitor got too close, the red worm instantly curled its body and lashed out as if delivering a warning. Startled, the little white worm quickly changed direction, while the red worm calmly returned to feeding on the layer of organic debris as though nothing had happened. Its body is long and slender, with clearly visible segments and a distinctive bright red color. This is most likely a bloodworm, the larval stage of a non-biting midge from the Chironomidae family. Its vivid red color comes from a hemoglobin-like pigment that allows it to absorb oxygen very efficiently. Thanks to this adaptation, it can survive in environments with very low oxygen levels. Bloodworms feed mainly on organic debris, decaying plant material, and microorganisms living in the sediment. This individual is only about 8 millimeters long and will likely transform into a pupa within the next few days. The key to sustaining life in this ecosystem is the algae. They absorb nutrients and carbon dioxide produced by the organisms in the jar, then release oxygen back into the water. We'll come back in a few days to see how the tiny creatures inside have grown and how this miniature ecosystem has changed. I came back a few days later, and the ecosystem was still thriving. The bloodworm, with its bright red body that we saw earlier, has now entered the pupal stage. Its red color has almost completely disappeared, replaced by a pale, translucent body with much more visible segments. This is a clear sign that it is undergoing its final transformation before emerging as an adult non-biting midge. Unlike the larval stage, it no longer spends its energy feeding. Instead, nearly all of its energy is devoted to the remarkable transformation taking place inside its body. In just 3 to 5 days, the pupal skin will split open, and an adult non-biting midge will emerge, completing the aquatic phase of its life cycle. Even in an environment with extremely low oxygen levels, this tiny ecosystem continues to reveal remarkable creatures that had remained hidden from us until now. The closer I looked at the bottom of the jar, the more mosquito larvae I discovered. Almost everywhere there was mud. They could be seen slowly crawling and feeding, but whenever I came too close, they immediately darted away. Another bloodworm entered the frame. It seemed to be trapped among strands of algae and layers of sediment. Although it repeatedly curled and stretched its body in an attempt to break free, none of its efforts appeared to be successful. One creature that especially caught my attention was this little snail. It moved incredibly slowly along the glass, and I had to record for quite a while just to capture it crawling a short distance. It could be a mud snail or a freshwater snail, but since I couldn't clearly see the top of its shell, I wasn't able to identify the exact species. It seems like everything is beginning to slow down. Let's see how this tiny ecosystem continues to change in the days ahead. The first thing I noticed after 15 days was the shed mosquito skins floating gently on the surface of the water. It seems the mosquito larvae we observed earlier had completed their transformation and emerged as adults. It's a shame I missed that incredible moment. However, because the jar was a sealed ecosystem, they could only survive for a short time before eventually dying. The second largest creature in this ecosystem after the giant water bug has finally appeared, a fruit fly from the family Drosophilidae. It's about twice the size of a mosquito, measuring only 2 to 4 millimeters in length with a pair of bright red eyes that make it easy to recognize. This tiny visitor is quite harmless. It feeds mainly on microorganisms and decaying organic matter. Its hind legs constantly rub together, almost as if it were performing the lively steps of a swing dancer. Meanwhile, one lone mosquito still clings to the glass, seemingly hoping for a chance to escape this tiny world. I'll give this ecosystem a little more time to see how much longer life inside the jar can continue. The water inside the jar had become much cloudier as organic matter decomposed and algae overgrew, making it difficult to observe the microorganisms inside. A thick layer of debris now floated across the surface of the water. This seemed to be the final stage of the jar, where the ecosystem was gradually reaching its end, and most signs of life had nearly disappeared. Just when it seemed like everything was over, it wasn't. The 2 giant water bugs were still resting quietly at the bottom of the jar, almost as if they were communicating with each other. These remarkable insects are incredibly resilient. As long as there's enough oxygen and suitable water, they can survive in this environment for a very long time. Now it's time to return these 2 little survivors to the wild and bring the journey of this glass jar to an end. I hope they'll continue their life cycle and thrive in a new home. Still, I couldn't help wondering if there were any tiny creatures left alive that I simply couldn't see. So I switched to my macro camera for one final inspection. After watching for a long time, all I found was a silence that was almost unsettling. In just a few short months, a whole miniature world emerged before our eyes from nothing more than a small amount of mud and polluted water collected from a storm drain. Every organism, no matter how tiny, played its own unique role in this ecosystem. Nature always finds a way to adapt, survive, and carry on, even in places that seem far too harsh to support life.